to dive in. I promise we won't be here all night because we did narrow down our slides. So there's less than that now. I'm Jill. This is Bill. Thanks for being here with us tonight. We might get people trickling in, and we are recording this, so you can follow up later if you want to watch it again. So our key question for tonight is, how do we think about substances, especially intoxicating substances, with wisdom? And as we covered in previous lectures, so you can go back if you didn't hear those, we really covered this scripture framework of how to discern, how do I interact with this thing in the world, this created good in the world. And so 1 Corinthians 6 is a key passage for that. Is this beneficial to me or others? Will it enslave me? And does it cover up my sin? There's just questions in that passage. That was a key passage that we will kind of take that framework with us for this lecture. And then in addition to that, we talked about 1 Timothy 5:23. That was a little bit, we talked less about that in other lectures, but this was about how the use of wine, Paul is saying to Timothy, use a little wine to help your stomach, right? And so it's about how, wine can be medicine, or substances can be medicine and beneficial in some way. So they're not all bad. And that's really what we want to cover tonight as well. We don't want you to hear all this and be like, oh my gosh, no substances ever. There are some benefits, and that's why we use them as humans. So in general, in the scriptures, pain relief is not wrong, but it's not ultimate. And that's what we primarily use substances for, is pain relief. And so when we look at the purpose, like why do humans use intoxicating substances or substances in general? It's to relieve pain or to feel better in some way, right? Usually by escaping pain. And so there's physical pain. There's all sorts of pain. There's physical pain. There's emotional pain. There is relational pain and spiritual pain. And you can see that kind of broken out on the slides a little bit. But what we want to really have you think about during this, and in general as you walk away and think about how to interact with substances with wisdom, is this reflection of what kind of pain am I most tempted to escape? Because that's really the root of a lot of this. And again, there might be a time for escaping it. There might be a benefit, but that's just a key question for us. Okay, so we are going to define some of our terms that we've either used in promoting this event or in other lectures, or that we're going to use in this lecture. And so one, we've called this lecture Respectable Substances or Respectable Drugs. And that might sound confusing to you. What we mean by that, it's sort of like what's culturally respected or acceptable. And the phrase comes from a Jerry Bridges book called Respectable Sins. And obviously sin is not respectable, but there are culturally accepted sins like gossip or whatever it might be. And so his book is about what are actually the harms of that. And so we are calling that these substances respectable because they are respected in some way, and that's why we feel we are okay using them. And then cultural assumptions, we'll kind of refer to that as part of the discernment process. Another word for this that's used kind of in spiritual language is worldliness. It's what are the accepted things in the world around us, and worldliness isn't just outside the church, it can also be in the church. So typically in the church, worldliness looks like legalism, and outside of the church, worldliness might look like licentiousness or kind of like a freedom that's the pendulum has swung all the way the other way. So that's kind of what we mean by cultural assumptions and these social norms, and using substances based on what's normal or expected and not based on what is like actually researched or what's actually safe or what's wise. Okay, and then just the medical model in general has influenced so much, including the mental health field, and it's very important, but some things that have trickled down from the medical model include just kind of this pain reduction at any cost, and that's a phrase that Bill used as a doctor, but just it's sort of like that's the goal, is pain reduction or symptom reduction. And pain reduction is not bad. That's not a bad thing. But it can displace deeper healing. And substances in general ease pain, but don't heal it. Okay, so dopamine, we're going to talk about some key concepts now. That was some of our defining our terms. Here's some key concepts. Zooming out on, we're going to talk about individual substances soon, but zooming out on how do substances interact with us spiritually and as whole human beings, and especially physically. And if you're new to the psychological field or the medical field, and you're kind of like, I don't know about this. I mean, dopamine is something God made. God made our bodies, he made our brains, and this is how they work. And so we want you to kind of understand what happens in the human body that God created when we interact with intoxicating substances. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter that regulates motivation and pleasure. And pleasure and motivation are not the enemy. Those aren't the bad things in this situation, or that can be misused. And so they are a created need and desire. Desires are not bad inherently. And there are natural sources of dopamine. It's not just substances. There's a lot of natural sources of dopamine, including exercise, sunlight, lots of vitamins and minerals and things like that. And so what happens with dopamine, I'll show you a graph in a little minute too, but basically all potentially intoxicating or mind-altering substances interact with dopamine, and they provide relief in the moment, and often sort of this like euphoria that we'll talk about too. And but what happens is when we use intoxicating substances to get that dopamine hit, it increases our tolerance of that substance over time, which means we need more of the substance to get the dopamine. So I know this is kind of a lot to take in maybe, but we'll show you a graph in a second. So this can lead to being mastered by the substance along the language of 1 Corinthians 6. And any drug then, because they all do this with the brain, any drug can really be a gateway drug. Sometimes we think of certain drugs as gateway drugs, but really any of them they affect the brain in the same way and kind of set the brain up for that to interact with other substances. Okay, so here's a graph that kind of just shows the difference between types of dopamine sources and its effect on the brain. I think there's a laser on this. Oh, there it is. Okay, so this up here, it says the yellow line is natural reward, so like exercise. And then artificial reward. This is saying like social media. So we're not even talking about social media tonight, but it has a lot of addictive potential as well. But what happens, these are hours, and so what happened, and this is dopamine level. And so you can see that in the artificial reward, the dopamine spike is huge to start, and then it plummets, right? And so you need another hit to get and you'll need more and more hits. Whereas something like exercise, it gives you the pleasure and motivation and has the effect, but it remains steadier over time. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about spectrum of use and some more terms that we might interact with when we talk about intoxicating substances. So abuse, you might hear substance use, substance abuse, substance dependence, substance addiction. Addiction is actually used less in the mental health field now because the diagnostic language has changed to include use and only use, really. There's substance use disorders. But these are ways of thinking about what we're doing with the substance. So if you hear of substance abuse, that means like a misuse or an overuse of a substance. So that might be like going out and partying and drinking way too much one night. That's an abuse of the substance. Dependence is a regular, so regular is the key word there, regular use to achieve a desired effect. So now we're using the substance for a purpose. We're like, okay, I need it to feel more social, I need it to be myself, I need it to get stuff done, that kind of thing. And then addiction, you're no longer in control of the substance is controlling and using you. So it's people use by the substance, right? It's you don't have control over, you're very dependent on it, and now it's controlling you. So this is really key here. So we are actually, in these lectures, not talking about addiction and recovery, even though obviously that's really connected to intoxicating substances. But that's a key difference because we are really trying to talk about the substances themselves and how we interact with them as Christians. And then we have other resources if you are wondering about that on addiction. So one place we have those are on the Oaks Ministry Collaborative site. We did a whole series on addictions and faith in January 2025. And so that's on our website if you want to find it there. But I just want to make that distinction. If you're like, what about addiction? We aren't going to cover that a ton tonight. We're going to talk about the substances. And I want to emphasize that most people will not become addicted to using intoxicating substances, although obviously it's a risk. Okay, and then one last kind of zoom out thing to talk about is multi-drug use. This is really increasing right now in a number of different ways. So first, people use substances that offset the effects of other substances. So like you might use caffeine, like if someone has a hangover from alcohol, they'll use caffeine to feel better, right? So it's kind of like using an upper to counteract the effects of a downer, or GLP-1 agonists to counteract the effects of eating too much sugar. We are going to talk about sugar as a substance today. So we're using more substances to kind of tweak like our internal experience instead of kind of coming off of them, but we're like overusing and then correcting with other substances. And then polypharmacy is increasing. This just means using for an example, fentanyl is in a lot of other drugs now. They're mixed together. And so people are getting more than one substance when they take a drug. And then drug interactions are often overlooked. So people are on SSRIs for mental health, for anxiety, depression, and they might drink alcohol and not, there's a lot of effects that we're not realizing drugs interact with each other. So there's effects for that too. Okay, so our Christian posture, we want to emphasize this when we've just talked about kind of zooming out. Our Christian posture towards substance use, intoxicating substances, and increasing use, we really want to recognize that it's increasing across multiple categories because we need to know that if we're going to reach people and we're going to receive people into the church, and we can't think it's weird. Obviously we don't want to be like, let's stay here in this place, but we need to not be like shocked and surprised and walk alongside people without adding shame, especially if they're coming for help and coming to Jesus. So Jesus talks about in Matthew 9:10-13, how he came for those who know they are sick, not for those who think they are righteous. And I think that's really key here. We all have idols, we all have sins, we all have things that we abuse and misuse for purposes to get what we need. And I think substances are just a really tangible example of that, but it's not the only thing. So I think it's just a posture of humility. And I will say this, like conviction. As we were preparing, I was like, okay, I eat a lot of sugar. That conviction isn't judgment from Bill Hefner, even though he made the slide. That's the conviction of like, what am I going to do with that? Okay, so as we get into the drugs and the substances, intoxicating substances, we're going to talk about a discernment process. So there's so much information we could share. And we really want to coach you in a discernment process so that you can interact with any substance anywhere and think, okay, like through this process. So the core principle is that intoxicating substances offer immediate relief, which again is not bad necessarily, but they do not build lasting resilience for human suffering or healing. And so a discernment process for thinking through, how am I using this substance? This is kind of a flow that we are going to, whenever we talk about one of the substances, we're going to go through this flow. and then we're going to talk about a case study. So the discernment process, first, what are the cultural assumptions? How are people using this? And kind of why, and what's normal, considered normal. Then what are the facts and the evidence? Like, what does research actually say? What does this substance actually do to the human body? What does it do to me, right? Like, how do I discern what it's doing to me? And like, what are the long-term, short-term effects? And then wisdom. What is helpful? What is enslaving? What does freedom in Christ allow? What is loving toward others? And with the case study, we'll really get into how am I using this substance to self-medicate? Okay, and so I'm gonna turn it over to Bill. He's gonna go through some of these substances. We picked the most, quote unquote, respectable ones nowadays that we thought were really relevant. And if you have questions, we're gonna have a panel at the end. And so you can use that QR to put your questions in as they come up when we're on each drug. And then, or substance, I should say. And then at the case study, we'll also have the QR code. So if you're thinking about your own life as you're reading the case study, or a friend or something like that, you can use the QR there as well for that. All right, turn it over to Bill.
Okay, great, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to work with Jill on this. I'm Bill Hefner, for those of you who don't know me, and I was trained as a family physician, and I have not done a fellowship work in addiction medicine, but have treated people with addictions, usually in consultation with one of my addiction colleagues at the Department of Family Medicine here at UW. So with that in mind, I'm going to try to talk us through some of the information we have with regards to these specific substances tonight. Yes, and if you have questions, please, if you can't use the Slido QR code, then just write them down, whatever. We'll try to get to them. Okay, so alcohol. Let's start with the easy one. I'm going to go over to, can we do the next slide here? Okay, all right, thank you. You got me. All right, I think first of all, just cultural assumptions. Let's just talk about that first. What is a safe level of drinking? That I think is really never been totally understood and proven. The American Heart Association, even in 2025, was still saying that moderate drinking may be safe, talking about 2 drinks per day, and possibly beneficial. They have since retracted some on that and said, we lament the poor data that we have to be able to make such guidelines. The World Health Organization basically has said any alcohol intake is harmful. So they're saying you shouldn't drink alcohol at all. And they base that recommendation on the fact that alcohol is a type 1 carcinogen, that it's associated with numerous, its excess associated with numerous carcinomas. So that's the reason why they have said no alcohol. And then now the USDA at 2025, they publish guidelines every 5 years. Now they're saying just consume less alcohol for better health, whatever that means. So we really have, I think, some confusion regarding where is the safe level. There's an increasing perception that seems to be voiced among younger people that alcohol might be more harmful than it was thought, similar to tobacco. And I think the cultural assumption around alcohol is it's a social lubricant, that we can enjoy it particularly at celebratory events. That seems like in Wisconsin, that's every weekend or every athletic event or whatever. It seems to flow pretty much at all of those. So alcohol is still the most widely used intoxicating substance. A lot of that is because it's legal, obviously. Interestingly, that 62% of U.S. residents aged 12 and older have reported drinking alcohol in the last year. And then 45% or so reported drinking the last month. And then we've got 20% of people reporting binge drinking, usually 4 to 5 drinks in one sitting or more within a 2-hour period. And again, that recent decrease in use amongst younger people has been observed. So a larger proportion of, as I said, adolescents and young adults are choosing to abstain. However, the total overall consumption rates for alcohol actually have been generally slightly increasing over the last 2 decades. And now, which is very disturbing to me, is this is primarily being driven by the increase in use among women, particularly women 25 up to 64. And so what we're seeing medically is definitely a significant increase in the prevalence of the physical manifestations of alcohol. The toxicity that goes with that, primarily what we're seeing is increased liver disease associated with that, because women attain higher blood alcohol levels with lower levels of consumption. That's the bottom line. And so if women drink to excess on a regular basis, this is going to be fueling another health crisis for us. Okay. So what are, quote, the safe levels that have been generally, if you will, proposed? The USDA in 2020 to 25 said 1 to 2 drinks per day for men and 1 drink a day for women. Binge drinking defined as 4 to 5 drinks at one sitting for men, or 3 or more drinks for women. By drinking to that level within about a 2-hour period of time, it raises the blood alcohol level above the intoxication level of 0.08. And so that's the reason. And for some people, particularly again women, that level can get much higher with just 4 to 5 or 3 drinks. And so drinks are defined as 12 ounces of beer if you have 5% alcohol blood volume, 5 ounces of wine, 12% alcohol by volume, and 1.5 ounces of a distilled spirit, such as whiskey or gin. Okay. So what does alcohol do? It produces at low levels of drinking, 1 to 2 standard drinks, an initial feeling of euphoria. I feel good. I feel relaxed. I feel uninhibited to some degree due to that dopamine release. Or as the psalmist put it, wine gladdens the heart of man. At higher levels of drinking, we're talking 3 or more, particularly for men, alcohol starts to have a depressant effect. And it starts disrupting communication pathways in the brain by various means, and that undermines inhibitions and impulse control. So we see, unfortunately, alcohol functioning in a lot of assaults, sexual behavior that is of poor judgment, and then leading to drowsiness, impaired judgment, and motor skills, obviously associated with vehicular accidents with people trying to drive under the influence of alcohol, with the poor coordination and slowed reaction times. Okay. It's really in the United States, 178,000 deaths per year, and 2/3 of which are associated with chronic long-term usage. My brother-in-law and my sister were doing church planning in Germany, and while they were there, the Germans did declare alcohol as the #1 health issue in their country. They finally came around to that, or alcoholism. They finally came around to actually saying that openly. Many health concerns associated with chronic alcohol use include cancers, and this is where the World Health recommendations come from, and particularly the GI tract, and then also breast cancer in women now has been associated more, but it seems that is significantly increased, like 4 to 5 times if a woman is a smoker. And then, of course, liver cirrhosis. And in my practice as a primary physician, hypertension. We don't realize how alcohol can affect high blood pressure or affect blood pressure. And so when I see people with high blood pressure, immediately one of my first questions is, how much alcohol are you drinking? And please be honest with me, because that is a contributor to many people who have elevated blood pressures. And cardiovascular disease, primarily arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, a common arrhythmia, very much associated with increased alcohol use. And then finally, alcoholic dementia probably will be becoming more and more of an issue. Certainly ranks up there at about 3 or 4 as the major cause of dementia. So the addictive potential, we have to recognize that alcohol is potentially very addictive, much more so than THC. And it's hard to estimate how many people in the United States who drink alcohol regularly misuse it or have alcohol use disorder. It's estimated to be anywhere from about 10 to 17.5%. Because oftentimes when people abuse alcohol, they abuse other substances as well. So it's hard to parse out all of those statistics. And so, of course, some people should not drink alcohol. We know that. And pregnant women or women trying to conceive, we don't know, and in fact, there really is no safe level for alcohol in pregnancy to avoid fetal alcohol syndrome. We just don't know what that level is. I've had women ask me, can I just have a drink, like a glass of wine, once a week? No. I just had to say no. We don't know what the dose is of alcohol that would cause fetal alcohol syndrome. Those who are recovering from alcohol use disorder, those taking medications that interact with alcohol, and clearly if a person has a health condition that is worsened with alcohol intake, like dementia or liver disease, we would say no. So what you may not know, again, as I said earlier, alcohol is classified actually as a group 1 or type 1 carcinogen, in the same category as tobacco and asbestos. And heavy use, regular heavy use, can cause multiple types of cancer. And it's the most widely abused drug in the U.S. now, due to its availability, legal status, and the social acceptability. Nicotine is number 2, and marijuana follows at 3rd as the most widely abused substances. And that's now due to just increased rates of vaping, particularly amongst younger people, and the legalized status of THC in many states. So what are people sort of expressing concern about, and that is with people drinking over the age of 65. The VA health system is now advocating that a person over the age of 65 should not drink more than 1 alcoholic beverage per day and no more than 7 drinks per week. And this is due to the increased risk of interactions with medications, as many people over age 65 are on multiple medications. Balance issues and falls. Falls now becoming one of the, I think either the 4th or 5th major cause of death in the United States. And then the issue with increasing confusion, possibly with dementia. A lot of people ask about the genetic predisposition, how much of a role that plays. Well, it's estimated maybe 40 to 60%. I don't know exactly. Jill, maybe you do. I tried to find where that statistic comes from, but I think it stems from the fact that many people with a genetic predisposition also have environmental factors, such as alcoholic parents or extremely disruptive childhood life, the trauma, those types of things. But we have to realize that genetic predisposition is not destiny. It does not mean a person will develop alcohol use disorder. Likewise, the issue with dementia, the gene that has been mapped for Alzheimer's dementia only is positive in about 12% of cases where people will actually develop dementia. So again, it's not destiny, all right. And interestingly enough, exercise seems to have a mitigating effect on reducing the risk of harm or all-cause mortality from moderate alcohol intake. So the study that was done in Norway included about 25,000 people. It was a good number, looking at over 16 years, looking at use of exercise and its reduction as a factor to reduce the all-cause mortality with people who were drinking moderately. Oftentimes in this study, people would start to drink who were abstainers, and then they would start to actually drink more above the 2 drinks per day for men. But exercise seemed to mitigate any risk of mortality. What they did was they excluded the bottom 20% of people who were not very good, not in shape, and just included the top 80%. It was a pretty interesting study. Okay. I'm not saying go exercise and then drink heavily, okay? That would be very unwise. All right. So let's look at a case study with regards to alcohol. All right, I'll read it here real quick, and then I'm going to have Jill also talk with me through this. So we've got a middle-aged man, husband and father of 2 teenage children, states that he drinks a beer or 2 daily, but never has any binge drinking behavior. So he's had this practice for at least 20 years, and he acknowledges that his children have asked to sample or to drink alcohol with him, and he has allowed them to do so. He wants to model responsible drinking or potential intoxicant use and set an example for them, thinking that might keep them from experimenting in substance use with friends. So how do you respond to that? Jill, what are some aspects of wisdom that might come to play here?
Yeah, I'll start with some, and you can respond.
I will respond as well.
So I think my question goes back to the why. So he wants to model responsible drinking, right? But I'm also wondering if he's modeling, so it's kind of like, what are the unintended consequences of what you're doing, right? And he also might be modeling that he needs it every day, right? And so I think it's just trying to think about what else goes along with what I'm modeling, and how do I actually teach and disciple. I'm assuming this person is a Christian, right? So how do I actually disciple my kids into understanding why I'm doing what I'm doing, so that they, for themselves, can think about why they make certain decisions or they do certain behaviors. So that's what I would look at, is kind of what's the root, what's the why, and how, what else are you also modeling? And then how are you teaching your children as you're showing their behavior?
And I guess the concern that this brings to me is the fact that he's seeking to try to keep his children from necessarily experimenting in substance use with friends. And again, there's so much more to that than just drinking in front of them. My concern would be definitely, are you locking up your liquor or securing it when your children have friends over? This is a temptation, significant one. And if your children think, well, it's okay to drink, Dad gave us something to drink, let's go raid the liquor cabinet and have a few drinks. I think that has to be clearly communicated that that's not appropriate. That's underage drinking, and it's not being supervised, and so therefore they should not do that. Just anecdotally, when my daughters were in high school, they wanted to go to a homecoming party at someone's house after homecoming, and I didn't know the parents, and so I did call the father, and I asked him, "What's your standard for alcohol use in the house? Or, do you have one?" He was kind of quiet, and then I just asked, what are you planning to do to make sure that this is not an issue? And he just blurted out, "Well, I'll just ask them if they've had too much to drink before they leave, and I won't let them drive." So this man had not thought through securing alcohol if he had it in the house. Number two, he had no policy for alcohol or bringing alcohol into his home. Well, needless to say, our girls did not go to that party. And they didn't like me for it, but they ended up going to a non-drinking homecoming party at the high school afterwards. It turned out okay. But I think this case study has a tension that there clearly is here of, yes, he is drinking according to guidelines at a safe level, but is he modeling something or using that to help calm himself down or to self-medicate? I think those are some questions that are good to ask about this. Okay, we're going to keep going just because I talk slow. I'm not as a quick talker like Monty, Jill, and Nick. Okay, so you're going to have to put up with a slower talker here. Okay, let's talk about marijuana. Obviously, big one. Cultural assumptions. It helps with anxiety. I got that all the time in my practice. Legalization implies that it must be safe, and there is clearly an increasing social acceptance to its use.
Bill, can I add just a cultural assumption?
Yes.
Anecdotally? So I also counsel at a mental health outpatient clinic, and some people are starting to come in, and we do an initial assessment. And we ask, what substances do you use? And people have started not even saying they use THC or CBD or marijuana at all. But then we'll get, meeting, and they'll say, I use some gummies or whatever. And I was like, oh, so you do use substances. But it's considered as sort of like a normal thing that doesn't affect other things. So that's just kind of where our culture is at from what I've seen.
And that principle always applies to alcohol. It is so minimized in terms of the amount that people really are drinking. And I was taught, take what a person says and basically double it. And that's probably what they're drinking. So, okay. So let's define what we're talking about here. CBD, cannabidiol, is a non-intoxicating compound that's derived from the cannabis plant. That's primarily derived from industrial hemp plant that does not cause a high. So it contains less than 0.3% of the delta-9 THC, which is the intoxicating compound. Now, it's legal to buy and to use in Wisconsin, and it's widely used for potentially therapeutic benefits, including pain relief, anxiety, aiding sleep. People seek to use it. It has been FDA approved for use in epilepsy for people who have recalcitrant epilepsy. Interestingly enough, in reading about this, there are two Wisconsin senators who are both hemp farmers, and they are pushing for legal, exemptions, for them as business owners to be able to subtract their business expenses and all of the things that normal business owners should have. So there is a lot going on legislatively in Wisconsin. Now, tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, is the primary psychoactive compound that's found in the cannabis plant, and that's responsible for the high, or the euphoric sensation that is associated with marijuana. Currently in Wisconsin, it is not legal for recreational use. So, as we talked about, the cultural normalization of marijuana This was in a Gallup poll, 2025, where 24 states in the United States have legalized recreational marijuana. And then there are 40 states, 42, that have a medical marijuana legalization along with recreational marijuana. And then, green are the states with a medical marijuana legalization. The dark blue ones also have medical marijuana legalization. That's what I meant to say. The black dot is recreational marijuana has been decriminalized, but there's no regulation policy in those states. And then finally, the gray states don't have a policy for either, and Wisconsin is in that grouping. Okay. So this is the cultural attitude on legalizing recreational marijuana in the U.S. We can see as of this decade we're in right now, it looks like about 70% of people in 2023 are saying we should legalize recreational marijuana. And I think, as you know, in the current Trump administration, they are pushing for taking marijuana from a Schedule I drug, which states you can't use it, and you can't really even use it medically, only maybe in research situations that are tightly controlled, to a Schedule III, which means it could be prescribed by doctors for medical purposes and used more widely in research. So I think that went through, or it was supposed to go through in April of this month, but I'm not sure if that's gone through yet or not. But that was an executive order by President Trump. So marijuana, 10% of adolescents used marijuana in the past year. Wow, 35% amongst young adults used marijuana in the past year, and this cohort is consistently the one that has the highest rates of use. But people older than 26 are using marijuana, and there is a significant increase in that age group, again, because of this social perception that I think it's okay, and legalization. So. Smoking marijuana actually remains the most popular form of THC consumption, with roughly 9 in 10 adults reporting it as their primary method. If you take a drag off of a joint, basically within 10 seconds, you start to feel the euphoric effects. It's that quick. Nicotine is very similar, 7 to 10 seconds. Vaping or smoking a cigarette, you will feel the effects of it. Gummies and edibles are obviously increasing quite a bit in popularity, but they have a delayed onset of the intoxicating effect, which sometimes can lead to people not feeling that effect, and so they just keep eating more in order to try to get the effect, and resulting in overconsumption. So daily use, interestingly enough, of THC now exceeds daily alcohol use. But the overall use of alcohol, because of its being legal, is still higher. And interestingly enough, marijuana users comprise, about 87% of all past year illicit drug users in the United States. I mean, there's so many illicit drugs, but marijuana is primarily the main one. Yeah. So what does marijuana do? Similar to alcohol, short term it triggers a pleasurable high, body relaxation, social ability, though not identical, but similar to the feeling one has after drinking a glass of wine or a beer. And then long-term effects, real concern regarding chronic use associating with just sort of blunting of our dopamine system. Basically leading to lower dopamine levels. That's how our brain sort of compensates. This constant barrage, of THC to those receptors just starts leading to lower numbers of receptors and therefore lower dopamine levels, reduced motivation and pleasure in daily activities. One of the biggest concerns I have, and that has now being well researched and documented, is how is it affecting brain development in adolescents who are advised or who are using it. And so we're advising that, adolescents and young adults up to age 25 should not be using THC. Unfortunately, adolescence is a time of experimentation. It's a time when so many of us went through, we're trying to find ourselves and experiment with things. It's unfortunate that this has long-term effects. Okay. So is marijuana or THC use, quote, all bad? Well, under 5 milligrams of THC, it's been shown really that the risk of anxiety, paranoia, and nausea are significantly decreased even with regular use. But the long term, there are harms and risks. But infrequent use, as I said, by people at very low levels, there has not really been shown to be any significant long-term effects. We talked about the dopamine blunting, but particularly with long-term cannabis users, we have brain adaptation, and so a lot of people lose motivation. A lot of people just don't have a reward responsiveness, and they feel anxiety, anhedonia, or the inability to feel pleasure. And unfortunately, evidence would suggest that some of these changes are not permanent for many, and some, though, can be reversed with prolonged abstinence. So I tried to get as best a statistic on what's the potential of developing a THC use disorder if a person is using marijuana daily, regularly, and it's about 9% is the best that I could come up with, yeah. So that's lower than alcohol. It's lower than alcohol. So what you may not know is that THC potency has significantly increased over time. 17 to 30% now, up from about 1 to 2% in the 60s and 70s. And the lasting effects on the developing adolescent and young adult brain. These have been done through studies following high school students through 9th through 12th grade, and seeing IQ decrease, learning aptitude being decreased, working memory, impulse inhibition, and even smaller brain volumes detected on MRI scans. And the mental health risks that are associated with use for adolescents extend on into adulthood. Those are things like developing bipolar, schizophrenia, other psychiatric disorders. And I think the big thing that I wanted to bring up today is there's a recent really meta-analysis review article that was well done, trying to review literature over the last 45 years of the use of THC for treating mental health conditions, like PTSD or depression. First of all, there are not many high-quality studies. A lot of them are really junk. But the ones that they were able to include as more well-done studies with a control group showed that there was basically very limited high-quality evidence for any benefit for THC to try to treat a mental health condition. That is, if you're going to try to treat your anxiety with marijuana, it's probably not going to work. And it's potentially addictive. So let's look at a case study with marijuana here. 27-year-old female, mother of 2 children, ages 2 and 4, who is a stay-at-home mom, complains of just being stressed out and anxious, primarily in the evenings after being with her children all day. Her husband does try to help her out when he gets home from work, and she just asks about chewing a THC gummy in the evening to ease her symptoms. As she has tried them in the past, and it seemed to calm her down. So Jill, I'll let you start on that one.
Okay. I mean, I know bedtime is really hard, so with little kids. So I understand, my first instinct is to just have compassion for the stress and anxiety, and the desire for kind of a break, even a mental break, is not bad. So I want to come back to, even when we were talking about alcohol, like I want to come back to the desire is not bad. Trying to alleviate pain is not bad, right? But I would, again, kind of go to, okay, the desire is I'm tired, I need some rest. I'm overwhelmed, there's a lot of stimulation, I need some quiet. And so I would try to figure out, how do you actually meet that need? Because the THC gummy is going to kind of cover that need, but it's not going to quench the thirst or meet the need. So I would just, again, kind of talk through, like, what are some other ideas? Could you go on a walk around your block? Like, when your husband, can he take bedtime for a while? At my house, my husband takes bedtime, and so I sometimes do go on a walk around my house on the yard. So, like, can you get outside? Can you? Is there something that's restful for you after bedtime that you look forward to? Things like that. Yeah.
And from a medical standpoint, I would say to her the same thing: is understanding where you're coming from, but unfortunately, chewing and eating a THC gummy every night most likely is going to lead to some dependence at some point. And it might be hard for you to be able to come off of that. And secondly, is are you going to secure these so that your children don't get a hold of them? I mean, so many of the intoxications by gummies, particularly in Colorado, which is where a lot of the data is coming from emergency rooms, is the number of childhood intoxications due to children getting their parents' gummies and other chewables went up like 100% in the last 5 years there.
And they look like vitamins.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look like kid vitamins. Everything's a gummy form now, so yeah.
Yeah, so those are some of the considerations I would have to say to her. Yeah. All right.
Okay, do you want to do nicotine? What we have, I think,
We have
left.
like nine minutes,
Yeah.
9.5 minutes left.
The other ones will be faster. Those two are the biggest, I think. So, do you want to do nicotine next?
Sure, let's do
Okay.
nicotine, and
All right.
then if there's another one, a shorter one, maybe we can try to do, I don't know if we want to try to do the GLP-1s or not.
Yeah.
We can do that. Yeah. So nicotine. So our cultural assumptions now are that vaping or oral patches are safer than smoking. This is what I hear a lot as a physician. Oh, I stopped smoking, but I'm vaping and using nicotine pouches and patches now. So that it's being seen as an acceptable alternative to cigarettes. And there's a perception that there's low health risk associated with it. Yeah. So unlike in the 50s, when nearly 50% of the US population smoked, only 10% of American adults now daily or regularly smoke cigarettes. About 2% you see with chewing tobacco, nicotine pouches, and then vaping. So I think many of us know smoking tobacco is the leading cause of preventable death in the US, and it's attributable to nearly 500,000 deaths in 2021. But among youth now, that is very concerning, who currently use e-cigarettes, at least 25% of them are reporting using them daily. So cigarette use declining, vaping increasing significantly, especially among youth, and it's these flavored products that contribute to youth use, like fruit flavored, strawberry flavored, and the FDA, they get constantly getting petitions to market by companies, and they're trying to put the lid on it, but they've approved some of these flavored products, and the youth really like it. Yeah. So again, what does nicotine do? Again, it functions in dopamine release, and it creates a pleasurable buzz. And that's what it does. And as I said, you take you smoke a cigarette, and after that first puff, within 7 to 10 seconds, you're going to start to feel that. Pretty immediate. Improved focus and mood. It'll oftentimes provide a temporary boost in concentration, memory, and mood, making it reinforcing to the user. Even when I was in medical school in the early 80s, I would have classmates smoking while they were studying. And they would just say that this really gives me a boost in my concentration and memory, so I'm gonna smoke. And then when I finish with med school, I'll stop smoking, and I will never have the effects of smoking. Well, needless to say, we've substituted other things for that right now. And so it's a stimulant, basically, response, triggering adrenaline release, but it also raises blood pressure and accelerates the heart rate. Long-term effects, wow. A lot of research being done now in brain remodeling and how nicotine really affects the neuroplasticity of young people, particularly adolescents. So it really oftentimes will lead to tolerance over a time, which makes it so very difficult because of addiction and withdrawal for people to quit. So you'll see withdrawal symptoms like irritability, anxiety, and poor concentration. But it dysregulates our reward system and alters it so that after frequent use, people just want more and more because it's harder to experience that pleasure, even from normal daily activities. And so what you may not know, it's highly addictive, as I said earlier, and it acts as a gateway, as many other drugs do, for future intoxicant use. And the brain will adapt and require nicotine to function normally. And so when compared to caffeine, nicotine is more effective at delivering an enhanced immediate focus. Caffeine, drinking a cup of coffee will take about anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes to get that peak effect. But we know nicotine is so much more addictive. The benefit will quickly disappear. And I just try to tell people, don't be fooled by the fact that these other products don't contribute to health issues. They may be less harmful as far as the carcinogens, but already cardiovascular disease, delayed bone healing is a big one in the orthopedic literature, and then affecting adolescent brain development. And they're also tied to problems with definitely oral health, especially. All right, nicotine case study. A 19-year-old university student admits to vaping a nicotine cartridge with an e-cigarette on a daily basis. Generally does this in the mid-afternoon to evening by himself. And when asked why he does this, he replies, well, it gives me focus and it calms me down so I can study. I know it's a lot safer than smoking cigarettes or other tobacco products, so I'm not concerned about it. Besides, a lot of my friends vape and are okay. How would you respond, Jill?
Teenagers are tough. So I guess he's a 19. I'm always going to kind of come back again to like, what problem is it solving? He's saying, I'm anxious, right? I need to calm down, and I need to focus. There's a social aspect as well, probably, if all his friends vape, and that's not true that every teenager and college student vapes. But for those who do, it's usually their social group, right? And so it feels like everyone does it. And often you have to change social groups, and that's hard as a young adult to do that. But I think it's looking at what other ways, like if this was my client, I would be looking at what need are you trying to meet? Like, that's not a bad thing. Yeah, we need to you don't need to have anxiety. Like, let's figure out how to address that, and let's figure out how you can work with how you're made and wired to study and focus. And then let's talk about like, what are the effects on you actually? I think some psychoeducation or some education about like, this is actually what happens with your body. So yeah, but it's hard because the pressure is so high when it's normal. Mm-hmm.
I guess from a medical standpoint, I would ask him, maybe your anxiety stems from withdrawal and your dependence on nicotine, and therefore you just have to do it every day in order for you to calm down and be able to focus and steady. And that more than likely, if you pressed him, he probably would say he's vaping even more to achieve the same effect. More than likely, if you really push that. So this is one avenue of self sort of stimulation. Adderall or stimulants are another frequently abused medication in that same sort of vein. Okay, we've got 1 minute and 20 seconds. What do you think? Should we do?
I think we should do GLP-1s.
Okay.
Because I hear a lot about them.
Okay. All right.
I guess, and at least I hear about them all the time.
Let's do it.
Yeah, that
Okay.
one, that's a little bit further.
All right.
You guys already switched. I'm sorry. Can you go back to the beginning? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, GLP-1 agonists. GLP-1 glucagon-like peptide is the name of this medication, and it promotes insulin secretion by its direct action on the pancreas. They're excreted by the gut when we intake sugar, but they also have effects centrally to reduce our satiety center or feeling of fullness, and they slow gastric or stomach emptying, thus making people feel very full very quickly so that they don't eat. People see it as an easy solution for weight loss. Yep.
And to clarify, this isn't an intoxicating substance in the same
yes.
way,
Yeah.
but we are seeing it sort of have an addictive effect, especially with eating disorders and things like that. So.
Yeah. So, as of late 2025, approximately 1 in 8 U.S. adults report currently taking a GLP-1 drug, representing just this really explosion of increase in use. And roughly 18% of adults report that they have used them. Now, they were developed, I can remember when they came out in my practice, they were developed solely to treat type 2 diabetes. They became very effective in doing so, to the point now where the American Diabetic Association, who sets the standards for diabetic care, lists them as initial therapy, particularly for any diabetic that is obese. You don't mess around with inexpensive drugs. You go right to these big guns. And so they've come into use now to treat obesity and have skyrocketed in popularity. Yeah.
Yeah, we are also kind of finding anecdotally that because they reduce cravings, they do reduce the effect of cravings for substance, like alcohol, too. And so there's not a lot of research that I've seen on that, but I've had clients say, like, it actually has helped me not want to drink. So there are some, like, positive potentially benefits to it. So I just want to clarify that, too.
Possibly. Yeah, the research isn't there yet, really, to support that yet. And one can only understand that the number of prescriptions also leads to incredible drug costs. 38% of users who take a GLP-1 to lose weight, right now, women are twice as likely as men to use it. And about 63% of users will stay on the drug for at least a year. But there's high discontinuation rates. And problem is side effects. There are a lot of gastrointestinal side effects. About 30 to 35% will stop because of those side effects. And then the drug costs is where I've seen primarily people will stop. They're so expensive. That's why people go and get them online in compounded forms. They're less expensive, but you don't know where that drug came from. You have no idea where it was made. So after 1 year, approximately 50 to 75% of users will discontinue, and because they've maybe achieved a goal, but 2-year rate of discontinuation, approximately 75% will stop therapy after 24 months. Again, costs maybe reached a weight loss goal, okay? But the problem is what people don't oftentimes know is that it requires long-term use. In other words, it's like a diabetic and insulin. You have to continue to take it the rest of your life, unless you make a very significant lifestyle change. The problem is, too, as Jill alluded to, it can mimic patterns that are seen in eating disorders. In fact, many eating disorder patients have obtained these drugs online. Or they've been prescribed, and the person who prescribed it did not take a history adequately to see that that person had an eating disorder. You'd think they could look at them and say, oh, I think you have a problem, but nevertheless, those things happen. And so we're concerned that it's often used without addressing the underlying issues. Obesity being such a complex problem, which has many, many factors associated with it.
And we've seen people not even experiencing obesity use these now, too.
Yes, just to maintain a very thin body image. So let's, and long term, there's some new research kind of coming out with concerns about bone health, particularly women, osteoporosis and development of osteoporosis, and that's a concern. So very quickly, we've got a 47-year-old female nurse who works full-time night shift. She has disorganized sleep patterns because of that, trying to maybe on weekends, get back on day schedule, has little exercise, complains of the stress of the hospital work. There are too few staff and a very heavy workload. So she says she's hungry all the time, and so she snacks throughout her work shift to appease her hunger, and she will drink a glass of wine before trying to get to sleep to calm her down. And so her sleep is disorganized from day to day, and she states she's very sleepy during her night shift work. She has experienced about a 40, 50-pound weight gain just in the last 2 years as a result of the poor sleep, eating, snacking, and lack of exercise, but has not developed diabetes yet and does not have heart disease. She's asking for advice about starting a GLP-1 agonist drug for weight loss. I have a lot of questions for you, but my initial thoughts are just, again, compassion and how much those 3 things, sleep, exercise, and diet, can really compound, especially if one of them goes off. So if you're not sleeping well, it's easy to eat poorly, and then you don't exercise because you're tired. And so that's just really easy to disrupt that cycle, I guess. And so I would try to just identify what are ways that you can tweak parts of those things. So what kinds of snacks are you eating, right? If there's an alternative to the GLP-1, what is it? What kind of snacks are you eating? Are there ways that you can kind of do some steps or count your steps or do some weights in your break time or whatever? But I think compassion for the stress and the cycle, and when it gets off, it's really hard to get back on. But just focusing on it's multifaceted, so just even tweaking one part will help kind of tweak the other parts. Yeah, there's so many layers here, and I guess from a medical standpoint, I would sit down with her with hopefully some shared decision-making about, first of all, there are many jobs for nurses on day shift that are open, or evening shift, and have you looked at trying to apply for those? I think it's seriously affected your health. Secondly is you're self-medicating with wine, which is weight gain for many, many people, trying to calm down.
And it disrupts sleep as well.
And it disrupts sleep, exactly. And then the other is the exercise piece. And so trying to help people discern what is contributing to this issue, even to the point of saying to her, you're a full-time nurse. I think your income would probably allow you to work with a trainer or meet with someone who could give you accountability with exercise so that it wouldn't seem so hard to get started, because that's the main issue with most people exercising. They can't get started very well. So those are the things I would address with her and say, could we hold off on the GLP-1 until we're able to look into some of these other things? If not, a GLP-1 may help, but it's not going to address the health issues that you're neglecting at this point.
Okay, so if you have questions, you can submit them here. We will probably have to do a follow-up podcast as well. And so, but please put your questions in. And do you want to take a break or just do? Yeah, just take a beat, soak it in, and we'll be right back.
All right, there it is. Okay, so I'm going to start off by reading a comment. And then I guess if you guys want to comment on the comment, we can, right? I guess that's what people do, don't they? Right, on comments and comments. Okay, we'll start with that. Another factor is that in this culture, we want a quick solution for our issues. We want a pill to cure our anxiety, for example. We don't want to do the work to find the underlying cause. So you guys talked a little bit about that. Did you want to add to that at all?
Yes, I agree. And that's what we mean by, like, substances can provide relief, but they don't provide resilience or healing. So I guess I just agree with that. Yeah. And there's lots of ways to get the underlying healing, which I don't know if we want to get into, but I agree with that.
Yeah, when you use the word relief, Jill, are you guys saying that we're using it like relief is the description, and morally speaking, it can be either escape or resiliency, the way you find relief? So a lot of these substances, you're getting relief, but it's by means of escape.
I'm saying relief is, I think it could be escape. Relief is immediate, whereas resilience is long-term. So that's how I'm thinking about it. So, like, we didn't get into opioids, but a lot of people use those for pain after, like, management after surgery. And so, like, we could argue about that, right? But the effect is relief from the pain, and it's meant to be used short term. A lot of people use them long term, right, to keep alleviating that pain or now other kinds of pain, emotionally or whatever. And so it doesn't build resilience. It's not like the physical therapy that will help you after surgery. It's an immediate relief from the pain. So that's how I'm thinking, immediate versus long term.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to start hitting up these questions, and if you guys have a preference on what questions you want us to address, you can vote for them in Slido. But I'm just going to start from the top. So the alcohol case study, does it make sense to focus on alcohol specifically with children, and I think the excess concerns, or on larger moral principles and then applying?
I think the issue with children is a practical collateral problem. My first drink of alcohol, unsupervised, came from accessing my dad's alcohol, as well as my friends. So, I mean, the example that you're giving, Bill, like literally that was how I accessed alcohol for the first time in my life. So I think you can't argue larger moral principles as whether or not you should drink at all. But if you recognize that some alcohol use is okay, and thus you have alcohol on site at your house, Bill is saying there's an additional security concern, which is very real, which is how do you secure the alcohol, right? So I think it's both. You could argue on both levels.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Nick in that, and that's why I chose that case study, for that reason, to also look at the moral principles of why this man was also drinking, 1 to 2 drinks every day. Was that really safe, or I should say necessary for him in order to hold back anxiety, anger, raising children, teenagers? Was he using it for that reason? I think that's the moral principle that probably also had to be addressed. Yeah,
I'll take kind of a slightly different take on this in regarding the case study. Like for for me, for what it's worth, we do allow our older kids, or at least our older daughter who's 17, to drink, right, in our house. And the reason why we've decided to do that is because we want her to understand how alcohol is going to affect her body when she's in a safe environment, so that we can, just make sure that she doesn't hop in a car, or that something, bad doesn't happen to her. That's our big concern. We don't want her to be somewhere else and have no idea, and just boom, 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 a couple shots of vodka, and all of a sudden she's going off somewhere with some guy and just getting really, really hurt. So that's the way we've approached it, is how do we help our kids to understand and be responsible within a safe environment, as opposed to, the odds are that they're going to be exposed to it somewhere else, and it's going to be far less safe than our home.
Yeah, for me, we had a house sitter that was in the person's late teens, that we didn't know their background very well. And when we were leaving, Lexi's like, okay, well, we have to lock one of the rooms in our house. And any alcohol that we might have, like if we have wine or something, that needs to go in that room. It needs to be locked, because we don't know this person well enough. We don't want to have any cause for them to stumble, or any context in which they might invite somebody over. Even though we trusted the person, we wanted to take extra precautions to make sure that we weren't a stumbling block. Nothing we did would be a stumbling block to that person. So I do think security is relatively important. So we should probably move on to the next question.
All right, can you speak to the spiritual components of addictions? This could be generational iniquities, roots of addiction, trauma, unhealed wounds, false identity, etc.
I think that's a huge question. So we could speak to that if we want to. We also have a lot of resources on the Oaks website, and that's oaksministrycollaborative.com. And on our articles page, we have all of the resources that we recommend. We have talks on it. We have podcasts on it. And it is a multifaceted thing. I just kind of related to this topic of intoxicating substances. People use intoxicating substances, and develop addictions for a reason. They're solving a problem, and that doesn't mean that they're doing it in the quote-unquote right way, but it's helpful to think about what problem are they solving, because it's, again, back to that pain question. Addiction covers pain. It's a connection with something instead of someone. So it's resolving isolation, it's resolving trauma. So there's a lot underneath addiction.
Even boredom.
Like feeling afraid of boredom. Feelings, like if you don't know how to grieve, if you don't know how to feel sad, you are going to escape that. So there's always a reason for an addiction, and it's helpful to get at that reason to help resolve the underneath and all the roots.
Yeah. A lot can be said on that one. I think we probably should keep going, though. Though that's a good question, obviously.
What are some healthy alternatives to manage social anxiety instead of using THC? Are CBD gummies or CBD oil helpful?
There have been, before we get into that directly, there have been a number of seminars we've had at the church on this, particularly in parenting and in some other contexts
about anxiety,
as well,
yes.
About particularly how to manage anxiety. I was texting a 15-year-old girl at a boarding school whose family goes here yesterday morning. First thing I woke up in the morning was I had a text from her in the middle of the night the night before, and she was just talking about the anxiety she was suffering from, like what to do. And it's amazing sometimes, just little strategies. My wife and Jill say this all the time. Anxiety is one of them, can feel like one of the most overwhelming, most immediate things that happens to you, and yet is one of the most treatable things. You can deal with anxiety. And one of these people I've talked to, I said, okay, because they come to me, they're like, I have this anxiety. It's like taking control of my life. And I read in the Bible, and the Bible says to don't be anxious, and it's driving me crazy. And I said, okay, just let's stop for a second. Go back and read the Bible, and don't read it as criticism. Read it as explaining how to deal with these feelings. Go back and read Matthew 6 again, and be like, what if all you had is a sparrowhead? What if all you are is a one-day flower? Jesus is actually telling you how to deal with anxiety. He's not mainly criticizing. He's criticizing you just enough so that you'll deal with it. And then he's telling you what to do. Philippians 4 is the same thing. Philippians 4 is giving you strategies how to deal with so you don't wallow in anxiety. And one of these younger people, they just went back and were like, oh, the Bible's so helpful. I was like, yeah, it's right there. So sometimes it's just helping people see that the Bible has stuff that, like, there's most of the strategies that counselors will give you that are more than just your senses are in the Bible. But they're richer and they're better and they're deeper. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like 5 things you see. And like there's certain like immediate bodily things that aren't in the Bible because they're easy to figure out. But the deeper things about how to think it through, how to change how you're thinking about it, the Bible has very great things for that.
I will say 2 short things. So one way to just kind of start tackling anxiety without substances is do the thing scared and start small. So do one thing that you're a little bit afraid of and just try it and think, okay, I was okay, right? I'm okay. Or if I'm not okay, I'm gonna be okay, right? Like just try it small and do it scared and then increase that. That's called distress tolerance in the clinical realm. And then second,
called faith in Christianity.
Faith.
It's called faith.
Or, capacity. Yeah, there's a lot of words for it. But I think also, I just want to say, I mean, I'm up here right now. I might not look anxious. Maybe I do. I don't know. But anxiety ruled me for most of my life. And I want to say only the Lord can see that in me. But it doesn't have to enslave you forever. So I would love to talk with you more about that, if that's your question.
And just briefly, CBD, sort of gummies and oils, any basis for which people say it can help with social anxiety is all anecdotal. There are no good data or controlled studies that say that. And because it's so socially accepted and my friend got benefit, I'm going to try it. And I think there's a placebo effect, frankly. I think people just, okay, I'm taking something, so it must work. It must get better because it helped my friend. Or she said it helped her. So it's really kind of a fallacy.
And we've had a couple situations, because teenagers are often not great on dose. So we've had a number of situations
no one is, really.
Where like teenagers are using these gummies and they'll take too many. And there was a girl that one of my friends knew, I think she was in Verona, where she tried to medicate her anxiety with gummies, and she ended up taking too many, and it made a major anxiety spike, and it hung with her the last I knew, she was not free of it. It essentially created an anxiety disorder that she didn't have, because it was kind of like going on a bad mushroom trip. Like, you think you're going to feel better, and it actually instantiates terrible feelings, and you can't get rid of them. And so sometimes, it's funny, sometimes, ironically, the very substance you think is going to help you can actually have the ironic opposite effect. So especially with teenagers who are not great with dose, but lots of people, like you said, are not great with dose.
I think also there's that withdrawal effect where then you start maybe feeling the anxiety when you don't have the drug, and so you need the drug to feel less anxious, but it's actually making you feel anxious to not have it. So, yeah.
So just to clarify, though, right, to distinguish THC from CBD, right? CBD, my understanding is that it doesn't create it's like almost like an herbal or something. Like it maybe is only a.
It does not have a euphoric effect.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about THC.
You're talking about THC. Okay.
He's talking about THC.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. All right. On the quote, genes are not destiny, with rates as you listed 50%. Why do we even think these genes are the Alzheimer's gene or alcohol addiction gene? Thank you, Bill, for answering that.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Well, let me first of all say there is no gene for alcohol addiction. All right. Basically, what that is there is gene mapping for the proteins that code for proteins that either absorb or break down alcohol. So that's where the alcohol sort of addiction prediction can come from. Obviously, there's no way to apply those to the entire population at large. Clinically, there's just no way to do that. So in terms of their role and what have you, it's hard to quantitate. These are the numbers that I sort of see in the literature, but they also include family history that's so hard to sometimes quantitate. And children of alcoholic parents have a 4 to 6 times greater risk of developing an addictive, issue with a substance, particularly alcohol. I mean, those types. We know mental health follows familial patterns, very much so. But again, we can't find necessarily a gene that will do that. So some of that 40%, 50% has to do with observational studies of that. Now, also, Alzheimer's gene is basically gene mapping, yes, looking at for the production of these tau proteins that get deposited into the brain. But again, I think the last thing I read about it is about 12% of people who have been studied and have this gene will develop dementia. That's a very low number of people. And in fact, these studies are usually done with elderly people who unfortunately are going to have more of a propensity to develop dementia anyway. I think there was a question.
In the cross-mitigating effects against dementia, like the things you can do to inhibit dementia, will work on that kind of dementia.
Yes.
So there's my understanding is the research on dementia is there's a version that's very early onset that will happen in the 30s or 40s. And that's utterly genetic, you just can't do anything about it. But like the 5 or 6 other forms of dementia all respond to diet, continued reading, mental access,
exercise,
cardiovascular exercise, and so on, so that they can be profoundly. Because my mom was so into this because her mom got a mini stroke version of dementia because of her cholesterol levels. Her family ran high cholesterol, and my mom just started eating like a very severe diet. She exercised, blah blah, and she's like 89 now, and she's probably too sharp. So, yeah. So anyway, there's a lot you can do against versions of possible dementia, including those affected by alcohol.
Yes. So that's why I said it's not destiny. Yeah. That there are things that we can do to try to mitigate.
Like reading your Bible every day.
Yes.
That's a twofer.
Yeah.
Good for the body and soul. Okay, so we're out of time, but I do want to just touch base on the mushrooms question, just because that is one of the substances. And I hear a lot about using mushrooms as a way to help with spiritual problems or to help come to spiritual awakening. Are there any major medical downsides?
We were gonna cover that in this lecture, but there's too many things to cover. And some people are now using psychedelics to treat PTSD, and the next lecture is on psychotropic drugs to help with mental health. And so I think we can cover that more in depth on that July 12th lecture. But Bill, if you want to speak to any of the medical downsides, go for it.
Yeah, all I can say is that the idea of these psychedelics is that you achieve a temporary trip, so to speak, to try to reconfigure brain synapses, what have you. The research on that is so in its infancy at this point. Maybe one of my addiction colleagues said maybe in 3 to 5 years we might have a better handle on it with research that's going on. But the risks of some of these drugs are very, very great. Ibogaine, for instance, that is being touted a lot for veterans, has significant cardiovascular morbidity associated with it.
To speak to the spiritual question, a lot of psychedelics were used in other religions as well throughout history. And I would think about, as a Christian, what I would think about it for spirituality is it's a sort of like kicking up dust. It's like you might see some cool things or like feel some cool things, but I think you're relating with a substance and not with God.
Yeah, there's there was a study done years ago, and NPR actually reported on this, and it was really fascinating because they didn't seem to get the joke, because they were doing research on religious people, and they were finding that the religious people were having euphoric experiences in their religious situations, they were not using psychedelic drugs. They were studying like Christians at church, and Christians at church were having like this kind of almost religiously euphoric experience, and they were doing this this research where they would try to create a similar situation by using a certain kind of electromagnetic field to create like a similar effect on people, to have that same kind of like, almost like feeling like a presence right? And they were able to achieve it. They were like, they could get people in a room and they could use this like electromagnetic thing and it would make like a certain kind of field and people would like, they'd get goosebumps or they'd feel like something was there, right? And they were like, you see, like you can like generate this religious experience. And I'm like in my car driving at 2 a.m. and I'm like, was that machine present in church when the people were feeling it? Because the answer is of course not. Right, and so in theory, like, if God is present and if in some way it interfaces with your physical body such that you can feel it, it would be some kind of energy. Maybe it's some kind of electromagnetic energy, who knows? And maybe you could make a machine that made something similar, that made you have a similar kind of physiological response to the actual presence of God. Similarly, you could have a mental transcendent experience, an opening, a broadening, or whatever kind of experience in worship or a spiritual experience, and there's no reason to believe you couldn't with some kind of something is chemically happening in your brain while your soul is having that experience. There's no reason to believe you couldn't trigger a similar type of experience with a kind of substance. But it's not that experience. You aren't experiencing God. You're experiencing the substance, right? And what I have experienced as a pastor is it's like having a spiritual conversation with somebody who's stone drunk. They're like, bro, this is so awesome. Like, I haven't talked about this, like God, like this in years. They don't remember a thing in the morning. And when people have these like pseudo-religious experiences on these substances, they, while they're high, will say all kinds of things about how expansive it is. But when they come down, they have not experienced ego death. It doesn't last 20 minutes. And some people that we know that have come to Christ later, like John Sikotowski is great on this. At Crossroads, before he was a Christian, he experimented with lots of drugs. And he remembered being like, oh, yeah, it was so expanding, bro. And then after he became a Christian, he was like, that was some of the most shallow claptrap I ever said in my life. Like, it was not deep. It was just a kind of like mind bending, which felt transcendent, but it didn't change my heart. You know, is what he said. And not like Jesus did. And ego death is harder than eating fungus. So, sorry, those are some additional.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. We'll have our last event in July. We might be doing a podcast. Otherwise, we're going to start releasing sections of the paper that we put together on Substack. Again, we want this to be a resource for you. We want there to be dialogue. And so if you have questions, if you have concerns, if you have comments, right, please be in touch with us either now or later. All right. God be with you all.